Before we get started, hit the comments and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Whether you're catching sunrise in Nairobi, burning midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to hear from you. Don't just watch silently, let me know where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. The neon lights of the Iron Raven bar flickered over the sticky floor, reflecting in shattered glass. Smoke clung to the air like a thick fog, and laughter cut through the tension of late-night drunks. In the far corner, Jax Harper, a cocky Marine with more confidence than sense, nursed a whiskey, his jaw set like iron. Across the room, a woman leaned against the bar, tall, poised, and quiet. Her presence was magnetic. The room seemed to shrink around her. Jax's eyes narrowed as he saw her glance his way, a small, knowing smirk on her lips. He misread it. "You looking at me?" he demanded, his voice rough, challenging. She didn't answer, just tilted her head slightly, letting a strand of hair fall over her eye. He swung first, a fist cutting the air where her jaw should have been. Time slowed. Her hand rose, not fast but precise. The sound of his elbow cracking against the side of his rib cage echoed through the bar. Pain shot through him, but it wasn't just physical. There was a spark of shock in his eyes. He stumbled back, crashing into a table, drinks flying. The room froze. And then, with a calm, steady voice, she said, "You just hit the wrong woman, Marine." Her name was Commander Ilara Voss, and most in that bar didn't even know it yet. She didn't just walk through doors, she owned the silence that followed. The sneer faded from Jax's face, replaced by disbelief. No one in the world could strike like that and remain untouched. But no one, except maybe her. And in that single heart-stopping moment, Jax realized he had just crossed paths with someone who commanded America's most feared SEAL unit. A unit whispered about in classified corridors, never seen, only heard of. His humiliation was complete, but the night was far from over. Something deep and dangerous had just awakened in the room, and he was standing squarely in its path. The rain fell hard over Norfolk Naval Base, drumming against the corrugated roofs in a relentless rhythm. Inside the SEAL training facility, Ilara Voss moved with silent precision. Every step, every turn felt practiced, almost ritualistic. Her team watched, trained, and followed, but none dared to question her. Her reputation was forged not from titles, but from results. Missions that others called impossible, survivals that bordered on myth. Ilara's mind drifted back, as it often did, to her first days at the academy. She had been smaller than most, underestimated, dismissed. Male instructors sneered at her, cadets mocked her, and yet she refused to break. Night after night, she ran drills until her lungs burned, her muscles screamed, and her fingers bled from rope climbs. She remembered one particularly cold December morning, snow blowing into her eyes as a rival cadet spat at her boots. "You'll never make it," he said. She had smiled quietly, letting the words settle deep inside her, storing them like fuel. Her path to command had been built on more than skill. She carried a fire, a promise to herself that no one would ever look down on her and survive it without consequence. The SEAL units she eventually led weren't just elite. They were a reflection of her relentless precision, her obsession with readiness, her understanding that every life mattered, hers, her team's, and the innocent caught in crossfire. And yet, she wasn't invincible. There were nights when she lay awake in her quarters, staring at the ceiling, haunted by decisions she had made, the lives lost, the families broken, the moments when one wrong call could undo everything. Her humanity lived there, hidden behind the armor of her legend. That night at the Iron Raven, she had sought anonymity, a moment of normalcy, a drink to remind herself she could still blend into the world outside classified operations. But fate had other plans. Jax Harper, arrogant and brash, had forced her hand. She had acted without hesitation, not because she wanted to teach him a lesson, but because instinct demanded it. Even as she left the bar, her mind churned. She could have walked away entirely, but some mistakes demanded attention. Jax's audacity wasn't just a personal affront. It symbolized the arrogance that ruined soldiers, missions, and lives. And now that symbol had caught her attention. She didn't know him yet, but soon she would. And when she did, he would learn that strength wasn't always measured in muscle or swagger. Sometimes, it was measured in silence, in control, in the quiet ability to crush arrogance without a single wasted move. The storm outside mirrored her thoughts, chaotic, relentless, yet cleansing. In a world that tried to underestimate her every day, Ilara had learned one truth. Those who struck first often paid the highest price. And Jax Harper had just put himself at the top of that list. Jax Harper stumbled back into his apartment, the leather strap of his duffel bag cutting across his shoulder. The pain in his ribs throbbed with every step, but it wasn't the physical ache that rattled him, it was the humiliation. He had swung first, expecting fear or at least respect. Instead, he had met something he couldn't comprehend: control, precision, and power wrapped in a calm, unshakable presence. Jax had built his life on swagger. Growing up in a small Texan town, he learned early that confidence was survival. His father, a retired Marine, had drilled him in combat tactics and the subtle art of intimidation. "Always own the room," his father had said. "Fear is respect. Respect is power." And for years, Jax had believed it, believing it had carried him through basic training, through his first deployments, through every bar fight and brawl he had encountered. But now, in his dimly lit apartment, he felt the unsettling sting of doubt. He replayed the scene over and over, the glint of Alara's eye, the slow, measured lift of her hand, the crack that echoed in his rib cage, and that voice, soft, firm, unyielding, telling him he had just hit the wrong woman. He had never been this undone before, not by a superior, not by a peer, and certainly not by a stranger. Something about her unsettled him deeper than fear. It was respect he wasn't prepared to give. Still, Jax wasn't one to back down. His pride demanded confrontation, an explanation, or revenge. He considered calling her, tracking her down, proving that he wasn't someone who could be embarrassed in a bar. Yet a small, stubborn voice in the back of his mind whispered that this wasn't ordinary. This was no one he could intimidate, no one he could bully. She moved differently, thought differently, and somehow existed on a plane above everyone he knew. The irony wasn't lost on him. A Marine trained to command, to strike, to survive against all odds, humbled by a woman he didn't even know. He scowled at the reflection in his window, rain streaking across the glass, and realized he didn't even know her name. Commander? Leader? SEAL? Something told him titles mattered little. The way she carried herself, the subtle dominance in the way she filled the space, spoke louder than any metal pinned to a chest. Jax's phone buzzed. A message from a fellow Marine, a buddy he'd trusted since boot camp. "Bar story," it read. He hesitated, fingers hovering. Could he admit this? Could he tell someone he had been bested without even a chance to fight back? His pride screamed no, yet his instincts, those same instincts that had kept him alive in combat, warned that Alara Voss wasn't someone to underestimate. And that's when a chill ran down his spine. She hadn't just defended herself, she had marked him. In the world she controlled, where missteps were punished with precision, he was now a variable, an unknown to be accounted for. He couldn't see it yet, but the collision was inevitable. And the higher the stakes, the harsher the lesson would be. For the first time, Jax Harper wondered if confidence alone was enough. And deep down he feared the answer might be no. The sun had barely risen over the Pacific coastline, the waves crashing against jagged rocks in a relentless rhythm, when Alara Voss arrived at Camp Valor. The compound was quiet, the kind of silence that only comes before chaos erupts. Her SEAL team, handpicked and tested beyond human limits, awaited her orders. Each of them was a ghost in their own right, untraceable, lethal, disciplined beyond imagination. To outsiders they were shadows. To their enemies they were nightmares. Alara walked among them, her presence alone enough to command attention. She didn't shout, didn't need to. Every soldier knew instinctively what was required. Perfection, precision, discipline. She paused by Lieutenant Cale Reyes, a man whose steady calm had saved lives on 3 continents. "Ready for the run?" she asked, her tone soft but unyielding. Cale nodded. She didn't need to see fear to know who respected her. She could feel it in the air, like the pressure before a storm. Her mind drifted to the world outside the compound. Cities that didn't know the battles being fought in shadows, civilians unaware that lives depended on her decisions every second. And yet, part of her longed for normalcy, the simple act of being anonymous for even a night. That night at the Iron Raven had been a fleeting taste of it. But humans had a way of complicating things. Jax Harper had crossed paths with her, a wild card she hadn't anticipated. She didn't fear him, she rarely feared anyone, but arrogance like his could be dangerous. In her line of work, underestimating someone, even a Marine in a bar fight, was a lesson paid for with blood. She had to account for him, study him, understand the threat he represented. Not because he was a soldier, he was competent enough, but because his ego could lead him to make catastrophic choices. And she had learned long ago that ego, combined with opportunity, was a killer. The morning exercises began with brutal intensity. The team moved through obstacle courses that tested strength, endurance, and mental acuity. Each drill was a lesson in precision. Every movement accounted for, every decision calculated. Ilara watched, her eyes sharp, noticing subtle flaws, tiny hesitations that others would miss. She corrected, guided, and sometimes silently observed, letting mistakes teach lessons without ever uttering a single word. Her thoughts returned to Jax again. A small part of her was curious, curiosity she had rarely allowed herself to indulge. Who was he really? What had made him so cocky, so convinced of his invincibility? And more importantly, would he survive the moment when his ego collided with her world? The waves crashed against the cliffs below, a reminder of the relentless forces she faced every day. Life and death were a constant, and in that world there was no room for error. And yet, somewhere deep inside, Ilara allowed herself a thought she rarely entertained. Even shadows can be disrupted by unexpected light. Jax Harper's pride refused to rest. Every coffee he sipped, every patrol he led, he found his thoughts drifting back to that bar, to the woman who had broken him with a single move. He didn't know her name, her rank, or the shadowed world she controlled, but he was determined to find out. If only to reclaim some fragment of his wounded ego. He began with the obvious, scouring military chatter, low-level forums, and encrypted channels he had access to. Nothing concrete. Only whispers, rumors of a SEAL commander named Ilara Voss, someone who operated in missions so secret, they weren't even listed in official records. His pulse quickened. The rumors painted a picture of a ghost, a leader whose unit was feared across continents, who could enter a hostile zone, disappear, and leave enemies in shambles. Meanwhile, Ilara's instincts pricked. She had learned long ago that anyone who sought her attention with that kind of persistence could be dangerous. Even now, as her team trained on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific, she noticed subtle signs. An unfamiliar tracking signature, a radar ping too clean to be random. Someone was approaching her world. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very arrogance that had once caused soldiers to fail in basic drills now threatened to brush against her edges. She smiled faintly, not in amusement but in anticipation. Some lessons had to be taught personally. And when ego collided with expertise, she had the advantage every time. Jax's pursuit became obsessive. He followed breadcrumbs. Old deployments, enlisted colleagues, news articles with vague references to operations. Each lead tightened the web, each discovery pulling him closer to the reality he wasn't ready to face. And as he pieced together fragments, a sinking realization began to grow in the pit of his stomach. This wasn't just a Marine, this was someone the world had built legends around, a person whose silence carried authority that entire platoons respected without question. Ilara's team, ever alert, noticed him too, not him directly but the ripple of disruption his presence caused. A stray message, a careless movement, a reconnaissance drone that shouldn't have been there. They briefed her silently as they always did. Ilara studied the data and her eyes narrowed. He was competent, no doubt, a soldier with skill, but raw skill without discipline could be catastrophic. Night fell, and the cliffs became shadows of black and silver, the Pacific reflecting moonlight like a river of fire. Jax was now on the perimeter, unaware that every step he took, every attempt to get closer, was being observed. Ilara stood silently on a ridge, wind tugging at her hair, her gaze fixed on the distant figure. Patience was her ally, arrogance his weakness. The stage was set. Neither knew it fully yet, but the next confrontation wouldn't be a swing in a bar. This would be a test of survival, skill, and control. And in the silent tension of the night, one truth lingered. Jax Harper had walked straight into a world that didn't forgive mistakes. The wind tore through the narrow canyon outside Camp Valor, whipping sand and dust across the jagged terrain. Jax Harper crouched behind a jagged boulder, eyes scanning the compound's perimeter. His muscles burned from the long trek, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Tonight, he would confront her, demand answers, reclaim his pride. What he didn't know, couldn't have known, was that this was no ordinary confrontation. Inside the compound, Ilara monitored the team's night drills. Her instincts were sharp, her senses stretched taut. Something was off. Not the environment, she had walked these cliffs 1,000 times, but the rhythm of the shadows. She had learned to read the subtle pulse of intrusion, the almost imperceptible disturbance in the air. And tonight, it whispered of a single human, a Marine, persistent, reckless, and dangerously curious. Jax moved closer, unaware that every step he took was under observation. He imagined the scene in his mind. Him storming the compound, confronting her, demanding she acknowledge his authority as a Marine. His confidence bordered on madness, yet his ego demanded it. He didn't understand that in Ilara's world, confidence was meaningless without control, without discipline, without understanding consequences. Suddenly the silence shattered. A soft click of metal, a trap set by Ilara's team, alerted him. His eyes darted, heart pounding, as a shadow detached from the darkness, and there she was. Ilara Voss, standing on the ridge like a predator, calm and immovable. The moonlight glinted off the edge of her tactical gear, outlining the lean, powerful frame of a woman who had mastered the art of dominance in every battlefield imaginable. "Jax Harper," she said, voice low, controlled, almost kind, but cutting through the night like a blade. "You've trespassed where you shouldn't. Explain yourself." Pride battled fear inside him. He raised his hands slightly, half in surrender, half in defiance. I just wanted," he faltered. Words failed him. How could he explain ambition colliding with legend? How could he express his desire to reclaim dignity when faced with someone who had shattered it effortlessly? Ilara's gaze was unwavering. She stepped closer, measured, deliberate, every motion precise. "You need to understand one thing, Marine. Here, arrogance gets punished. Ego can kill. And persistence without discipline, well, it teaches lessons you won't forget." Her words weren't a threat, they were fact. He felt it in his bones. Jax's chest tightened. He realized in that moment that the bar had been a warning shot, not a fight. Every instinct told him to flee, yet every ounce of pride rooted him in place. And in the quiet tension of the canyon, surrounded by shadows and whispers of waves crashing below, he understood something terrifying. He was now a student in a class he hadn't signed up for, and the instructor was America's most feared SEAL commander. Ilara turned, signaling a silent command to her team. Lights flickered briefly, shadows shifted. Jax knew he was outmatched, but whether he survived this night would depend not just on strength but on humility. Something deep inside him shifted, a small spark of understanding that arrogance alone wouldn't save him. The night held its breath. The lesson was about to begin. The cliffside training course stretched before Jax like a living beast, jagged rocks jutting out over a roaring sea, ropes dangling like serpents in the wind. Ilara's team moved with a silent rhythm, each soldier a shadow of lethal precision. Jax's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped forward, realizing the truth he had avoided for too long. This wasn't a bar fight. This was survival. Ilara watched from the ridge, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. "You think confidence is enough," she said, her voice carrying across the wind. "It's not. Control is everything. Discipline is survival." Jax clenched his fists, sweat stinging his eyes as he began the first obstacle, a narrow ledge above the jagged waves below. One misstep and he would fall, a lesson harsher than any barroom humiliation. Each challenge pushed him further, scaling walls slick with rain, balancing on ropes swaying like pendulums, navigating darkness lit only by the pale moonlight. His muscles burned, his lungs screamed, but what hurt most was his pride. Every misstep echoed in his mind, the crack of his ribs at the bar, the smirk of the woman who had broken him with one move. "Focus," Ilara's voice cut through the storm. "Not pride. Not ego. Focus." He realized that each obstacle mirrored the lesson she had taught him before. Strength alone was meaningless without precision, without awareness, without respect for the consequences of action. As he approached the final challenge, a vertical climb up a cliff face with nothing but a thin rope, Jax faltered. Fear gripped him, and for the first time he considered giving up. Below, the waves thundered like a warning, and he felt the weight of his arrogance crashing down. But then a shadow appeared beside him. Lieutenant Kale, silently offering guidance, a hand on his back, a steady presence. He nodded, understanding dawning. Survival was a team effort. Pride alone was deadly. Jax pushed forward, muscles trembling, hands blistered. Inch by inch, he climbed, listening to Ilara's words echoing in his mind. The moment he reached the top, a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and humility washed over him. He had survived, not because he was cocky but because he had adapted. He had listened. He had learned. Ilara descended from the ridge, her eyes locked on his. There was no malice, no judgment, only acknowledgement. "Not bad, Marine," she said. "You might survive after all. But remember this, one misstep, one lapse of arrogance and you won't get a second chance." For the first time in his life, Jax felt true respect. Not the kind that came from fear or intimidation, but earned through endurance, humility, and understanding. He realized he had underestimated not just her, but himself. The journey ahead would demand more than pride, it would demand transformation. The wind whipped around them, carrying the sound of crashing waves, the echo of lessons learned in silence. Jax Harper had stepped into a new world, A world where arrogance alone could kill, and where mastery was measured in control, precision, and unwavering discipline. And somewhere deep inside he knew this was only the beginning. The dawn painted the cliffs in blood-orange light, waves crashing violently against the rocks below. Jax Harper sat on a narrow ledge, his body aching, muscles trembling from exhaustion, yet his mind was clearer than it had ever been. He had survived the trial, but more than that, he had glimpsed the truth behind Ilara Voss, the strength, the discipline, and the silent fire that had made her legend. Ilara approached silently, moving like a shadow over the cliffs, her expression calm yet commanding. She didn't speak at first, simply watched him struggle to catch his breath, her eyes measuring, assessing. Finally she said, "Strength isn't enough. Willpower isn't enough. Pride will kill you faster than any enemy. Only control, focus, and respect for the situation keep you alive." Jax swallowed hard, finally feeling the weight of humility settle in his chest. I get it now," he admitted, voice raw. "I thought confidence meant I was untouchable. I thought I could handle anything." His eyes met hers, and for the first time he didn't see a threat. He saw mastery, a reflection of what he could become if he let go of arrogance and embraced discipline. Ilara nodded slightly. "Good. Most Marines never understand that. They fight with ego and fire, not strategy. And they die because of it. You survived, Jax Harper, not because you're the strongest, but because you adapted. You learned. That's what matters." A hush fell over the cliffs as the sun rose higher, casting light over the rugged terrain. In that silence, a fragile bond formed, not friendship, not rivalry, but understanding. Jax realized that Ilara's world was not one he could dominate with bravado. It was one he had to respect, earn, and navigate carefully. Then came the test he hadn't expected. A distress call from a nearby training zone. A simulated hostage scenario designed to push even the most skilled operatives to their limits. Ilara turned to him, gaze unwavering. "You're coming. Prove you've learned. This isn't a drill for ego, it's a test for survival." Jax's heart raced, a mix of fear and determination. He nodded, gripping his gear tighter than ever. The mission would push him to his limits, physically, mentally, and emotionally, but now he had something he hadn't had before: perspective. He understood the stakes, the consequences, and the role of humility in the face of overwhelming skill. As they moved through the rocky terrain toward the training zone, Jax couldn't help but glance at her. Every movement, every command she issued, radiated authority. And for the first time he felt something he had never known before: true respect. Not the kind that came from fear, not the kind that came from victory, but the kind that came from understanding the magnitude of her skill and the cost of underestimating her. The waves crashed below them, a reminder that the world was dangerous, unpredictable, and unforgiving. And as they approached the simulated threat, Jax Harper knew one truth above all. He was no longer fighting just to prove himself. He was fighting to survive, to learn, and to earn the respect of the woman who had shattered his arrogance and changed him forever. The sun had dipped behind the jagged cliffs, plunging the training zone into a deep, foreboding twilight. The simulated hostage scenario was no longer a drill in Jax Harper's mind. It felt dangerously real. Smoke rose from overturned vehicles, alarms echoed across the compound, and every shadow seemed alive with threat. He could feel the weight of his gear, the pounding of his heartbeat, and the heavy presence of Ilara Voss beside him, calm, precise, unshakable. "Remember your lesson," she whispered, voice cutting through chaos like a blade. "Control. Focus. Discipline. Ego kills." Jax swallowed hard and nodded. Each obstacle, each threat, demanded every ounce of concentration he possessed. His earlier arrogance, the swagger that had carried him through countless missions, was gone, replaced by a raw understanding of vulnerability and necessity. One wrong step, one hesitation, and the simulation, though artificial, would become a brutal teacher. They moved through the wreckage with silent efficiency. Ilara's team operated like shadows, every movement choreographed, lethal. Jax followed, instinct guiding him now, yet tempered by caution and respect. He covered angles he had previously ignored, anticipated threats he hadn't considered, and communicated in silent hand signals rather than brash commands. Every action reflected the lesson she had taught him. Then the unexpected, an ambush from a hidden vantage point. Smoke grenades exploded, blinding him, while figures emerged from the shadows, simulated weapons raised. Panic would have been natural. Before he would have charged recklessly. Now he paused, counted, analyzed. He moved, not fast, not brashly, but with deliberate precision, neutralizing threats alongside Ilara's team. At one point he found himself cornered, back to the cliffside wall, enemy in front, no apparent exit. His muscles tensed, memories of humiliation at the bar flooding him. And then Alara appeared, not as a shadow this time but as a force of nature. She moved past him, disarming the closest threat with a calculated strike, and her eyes met his. "Adapt," she commanded, and suddenly everything clicked. He pivoted, moved, and survived the trap, heart pounding, lungs burning but alive. The mission ended with silence settling over the zone. The smoke lingered, the alarms faded, and Jax finally exhaled. He turned to her, awe mixed with exhaustion in his gaze. She didn't smile, there was no need, but there was acknowledgement, respect earned in the crucible of fire and shadows. "You've done well," Alara said quietly, almost softly. "Not many survive this intact. You did because you listened, because you learned. Ego alone won't save anyone, Jax. Understanding will." For the first time he felt humbled, transformed. The cocky Marine who swung at a woman in a bar had been replaced by a soldier who understood the magnitude of true skill, the weight of leadership, and the cost of arrogance. And as they looked over the cliff, the Pacific waves roaring beneath them, Jax realized that this night, this trial, was more than survival. It was awakening. A recognition that some people, some leaders didn't just command respect, they demanded it silently, precisely, and unflinchingly. The shadows receded, leaving clarity. The lesson had been brutal, unforgettable, and final. The morning sun broke over the cliffs, spilling golden light across the training compound. Jax Harper stood beside Alara Voss, silent, exhausted, yet profoundly changed. The Pacific waves thundered below, a reminder of the relentless world they lived in, a world that demanded precision, discipline, and respect. He no longer felt the sting of humiliation from the bar. The lesson had been far deeper, far more transformative. Alara watched him, her presence commanding yet not intimidating. "You've learned a hard lesson," she said, her tone calm, measured. "Strength without control is dangerous. Confidence without respect is arrogance. Today you proved you could adapt. That's what survival demands." Jax nodded, swallowing hard, a weight lifting from his chest. "I get it now," he admitted, voice steady. "It's not just about being tough. It's about understanding, about respecting the mission, the team, and the stakes." His eyes met hers, filled with newfound humility. "And I respect you. Not just for what you can do but for who you are." Alara allowed a rare, faint smile. It was brief, fleeting, but it carried acknowledgement, recognition that the cocky Marine had transformed into a soldier worthy of operating in her world. She turned, signaling her team. They moved as shadows once more, leaving Jax to absorb the moment, the silence, the lessons learned under fire and fear. Later, back at the base, Jax reflected on everything that had happened. The bar, the humiliation, the trials, the near-death scenarios. Each moment had stripped away layers of ego, leaving him raw, aware, and alive. When he finally left the cliffs, the wind carrying salt and sun on his face, he felt different. He didn't feel inferior, he felt awakened. The cocky Marine who swung at her in a bar had been replaced by someone who understood that true strength was measured not in punches thrown, but in discipline, awareness, and the ability to adapt. Alara remained a shadow in his world, untouchable yet approachable, a force of nature whose legend was no longer abstract, no longer distant. And for Jax, the memory of that first swing, that first mistake, became a reminder that arrogance could be fatal and humility could be life-saving. The final scene lingered over the cliffs, waves roaring below, sunlight catching the edge of Alara's tactical gear, Jax standing beside her, silent, transformed. The world was the same, yet everything had changed. Lessons had been learned, respect had been earned, and a once cocky Marine had become something more, someone ready to survive, ready to lead, and ready to honor the lessons of the most feared SEAL commander in America. The story ended not with victory or defeat, but with understanding, an awakening that echoed long after the waves had receded.